This is Dan DeSantos from Muddy Colors, and today I'm really honored to be joined by comic artist David Finch. If you guys read Muddy Colors, you've probably heard me mention David Finch's anatomy videos many times. David Finch is a phenomenal comic artist, well known for his work on Cyberforce and Batman, amongst many other things. And I think he has some of the best anatomy videos out there on YouTube for the kind of work that I like to do. Anatomy where it's not necessarily based on real life or figure drawing, but a more fantastical approach to anatomy, things like superheroes and monsters. And so today, Dave is going to talk to us a little bit about his approach to anatomy and how we can push that anatomy even further. What happens if you want to paint monsters, or you want to paint somebody who's 10 feet tall, or you want to paint somebody who's really skinny? What do we do to a human figure in order to adapt that? David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, I really am excited for this as well. Like I was mentioning, I've been watching your anatomy videos over and over on YouTube, and I think you make this look so much simpler than most most people. Can you tell us a little bit about your history, how you learned how to do anatomy in the first place? Did you go to art school and stuff?
I didn't go to art school, but in a way, I feel like I sort of did. I went to a very specific art school. My first job, I was an intern for Mark Silvestri at Image Comics. And so I learned everything that I know from not only Mark, but also the other artists that were working in the studio. It was a really supportive group. And I think we all learned a lot faster than we would have on our own. And I had to develop a certain amount on my own before I got to that point, but I was nowhere near ready for real comic work when I broke in.
And was this an internship? Was this like doing coffee and like getting coffee and running errands, or was this an actual like art-centric doing work sort of position there?
I think they called it an internship because they wanted people to understand that, they're bringing this in, but we're there to learn. None of us were really ready. Every artist, for the most part, that came in around that time was pretty untested. We were all new and we had a lot to learn. And so it wasn't coffee or anything like that. We were drawing. And as we became ready for it, we just would get more work. I started, the first thing that I did was a pinup. And this is what we did. We actually, Image was putting out a lot of pinup books at the time because you could put out just about anything and it would sell. It was different times.
You really could.
And it was a great way to, get some young artists' feet wet without giving them scripts and the kinds of things that'll really trip you up. So that's how I started. And then some backgrounds and, just on from there.
So you would do backgrounds for, say, Mark Silvestri? You would work on his pages?
Yeah, which was a daunting thing. That was my first credit, actually. It wasn't the first thing that I did, but it's the first thing that came out. It was on deadline. So I did 2 pages of Cyberforce backgrounds, which is still the coolest credit that I have to this day.
Very cool. How did that even come about? Like, given that era, I mean, nobody was on Instagram or Facebook or anything. How did you land an internship at Image Studios? Did they put a call out?
No, there was no way to. I actually sent samples to both Marvel and DC a few times. And I got some pretty good feedback. Mike Carlin was, the Superman group editor at the time. And for a long time, he was very supportive. It never went farther than letters, but I got a script from him to try out on. I failed badly. And so I have to say, sending your work in, it can be frustrating and it can be a lot of, you really get ignored, but you get some pretty good feedback from some people too. And it was worth it for me to do that. The best feedback I got, though, by far, and I think it's still true to this day, is conventions. Now, unfortunately, conventions are a little bit tough right now. I think we're coming back slowly. And I broke in actually going to New York. I convinced my mother to drive me 16 hours out to New York City.
Wow. And were you already in Ontario at that time?
Sorry?
Were you in Ontario then as well?
Oh yeah, I've been in the same basic place my whole life.
Wow.
Aside from a stint at Top Cow in California.
That's my point.
There was somebody young at the studio that was manning the booth, and I showed them my work, and they said, "Come back," because the editor in chief of Top Cow was David Wohl. He was going to be back apparently, and so I sat around for half an hour or so until he came back. I showed him my work, and they were willing to take a chance. So it was.
Wow.
was a good
That's
day.
awesome.
I am not educated at all. And I thought, wow, it's like this or nothing.
So the
I didn't
stuff
have
that
anything to
you
fall
had
back on.
shown them, how were you learning at that point? Were you just emulating these artists? Were you copying? Did you more making stuff up? What were you doing prior to that?
I really tried as much as I could to systematize it as well as I could. And so I spent the first 2 months when I first decided I wanted to try it. I copied some Mark Silvestri and some Jim Lee artwork, very poorly, in retrospect, but I was proud of it at the time. And um, I tried to draw a couple of pages. I did some samples that I brought to a convention in Detroit, and I got some feedback from a few different artists. Kyle Hutz, who is Marvel and many others artists. He's still working now. He does beautiful work. He was probably the most influential artist for me that made this work out for me. I don't know if it would have worked out without him. He spent the better part of an hour with me telling me how to learn. And
Oh man.
his recommendation was to draw the George Bridgeman Guide to Life Drawing. I think it has a couple of different names depending on who's printing it, but it's George Bridgman's
Constructive
Anatomical
anatomy. Yeah.
constructive anatomy, and close the book and draw the whole thing again. Now, obviously, it's impossible to do the whole thing from memory, but you open it, look at a picture, close it, and draw it. And that actually really became a template for me to learn everything. So I did that twice. I'm a little obsessive. I think you need to be. And from there, that was kind of my technique for learning from other artists too. And I don't have a background in life drawing, which I should. And I think it's a very valuable thing. And I certainly wouldn't want to say, oh, no, that's, comic artists, we tend to be a little bit, we're kind of our own breed, I think, a little bit. We're generally more likely to be uneducated and more likely to only be able to, use a pencil and not paint. And I'm trying to learn those things now, but
Yeah.
so,
I think should is maybe not the right word. I sometimes wonder about that because I don't know that even though life drawing is really invaluable for a ton of art forms and using photo reference is really valuable for a ton of forms, I don't know that those things necessarily improve a lot of comic art, at least not all comic art. There's some styles that I just adore, Raphael Grandpa or somebody that are so distorted that I don't think they would be better had they gone through an academic education. That there's this weird language comic book artists have that is really truly quite different than a lot of other sort of drawing centric art forms, I think.
It really is. Well, it's cartooning. And no matter how complex it gets, I think at its core, it's at its best when it's cartooning. And when it gets photo referenced, it can start to lose that a lot. And so I knew I wanted to be a comic artist. It was all I ever aspired to, and it's still all I ever aspire to. It's my dream job. And so it just felt natural for me to look at the kinds of artists that I wanted to be and try and steal as much from them as I could. And I do that still to this day. I find, an artist will draw a hand from a particular angle and it just looks great. And I can envy that, or I can copy it until I can do it myself. So
yeah. And was that your thing? Was just copying early on as much as you could?
Yes. And so what I would do is I would set out, I'd say, okay, this week I'm just going to work on legs. And I would just draw leg after leg after leg from the same angle. And then I would draw from the side over and over and over again. And this would be just copying Bridgeman really out of my head. And then I would look at I'm a big Alan Davis fan. There are a few artists that I would look at and I would copy all of their legs, and I would do that for a week solid. And then I would move on the next week and I'd work on arms. And I tried to systematize it as much as possible. At the end of the month, I would put the figure together from wherever I was with what I had collected and try and draw figures. I really didn't draw pages at all or backgrounds for well over a year. I was so focused on, and I really think that there is so much to learn. It's not possible to learn it all at once. It's actually, I think all of it is very easy if you break it down into its smallest components. All of those components are easy enough to learn, and you need to be patient with yourself and learn each of those as their own thing, and then move on to the next thing once you've got a good grasp of it. And it takes time. It's like anything that is more complex, but it's very, very learnable. If you approach it the right way. And I think the absolute worst way to approach it is to just draw pinups of your favorite character. You know, it's not a way to learn; it's a way to have fun. But I think you have to decide what you want to do, and if you really want to get better and be a professional at anything, painting or anything, I think you need to take the time to study.
I think it's one of my great pitfalls is that the great majority of illustration is essentially just pinups. It's just a one shot, make this person look really attractive on a cover kind of thing. And the stories that you're telling on a cover are not the kind of stories you would tell on a comic panel, that they're much more ethereal or ephemeral, that they're not actual scenes. So yeah, you do end up painting these like very, very pinup kind of images that I think for a long time was a detriment to me, because I wasn't like, oh, I could skirt the perspective issues. I could skirt all these anatomy issues because everybody's wearing leather or whatever. And now I'm starting to see all these things that it's like, yeah, I neglected this early on and I need to get better at this stuff now. And it's almost easier now that I have the foundation to build off of, that I can go back and work on my weak points and build.
I think that's true. I think it can be really difficult if you're not willing to question the things that you know how to do well. That's where learning, everybody says you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And I think where that becomes true is if you have a way of doing things and that's the right way, and you're not willing to bend on that, well, it's impossible to bring anything in. So, and I'm trying desperately to not be that kind of artist that's not willing to question what I do.
I think we're also fortunate that we live in a generation now where we're exposed to young upcoming artists like never before. And the work I'm seeing is just, it's astronomical. It's so far ahead of what I could have been doing at that age back in the 90s that it kind of like lights that fire. It's like, ooh, I better step my game up.
Oh yeah. Well, the illustration world has gone from, initially really New York, or people that lived very close to New York, to with FedEx, not really that long ago. Well, okay, a long time ago, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But then it opened up to, America and Canada, and the talent pool got much bigger. And I think that resulted in just a higher general quality. And now it is absolutely worldwide. Anyone from anywhere, it really doesn't matter where you are. People are happy to work with you. And the great thing is, if you're learning, there are truly no limitations to making a career. The bad thing is if you're already in the business, yeah, like you said, you're competing against artists that there wasn't that level of quality before.
Yeah, man, I think about kind of this collective unconscious all the time and how we are all growing. It's this rising tide. Like what passed for great comic art in the 70s compared to, well, I mean, granted, that's some of my favorite comic art, to be fair, but the expectations of things now, it really is insane. The quality everywhere is so good in all genres. It really is.
It is.
If you were to have redone any of your education, would you do it differently in any way? If somebody's watching this and they kind of want to become a comic book artist, what would you recommend for them?
That is a really good question. I would strongly recommend that you study perspective more thoroughly than I did. It was a real struggle for me when I started, and I felt like I was really behind the curve from a lot of the other artists because I just didn't work on it enough beforehand. So that would be a big one. I didn't really understand storytelling. Now I have to say, storytelling, I keep saying this stuff is easier than you think, and it is. And storytelling is really not that hard. Now, if you want to get advanced with it and be very subtle with it, and that's harder. And there's a lot of
yeah.
But at its base form, it's very, very easy to do. I learned it really just kind of on the job. Actually, I had to learn a couple of times. I learned at Top Cow, where I started with that style, and then I went to Marvel, and I was working with Brian Bendis, who is a phenomenal writer and an artist, and he had a very high standard of what he expected for storytelling, and I had to up my game a lot. It was a stressful time. And, as taste changed, I went from doing a lot of tall panels to a lot of horizontal panels and much more of a cinematic style. So, you have to be willing to roll with the punches as they come. I would say The things that I regret, though, in terms of education, are more. I never learned how to paint, and it's something I'm trying to learn now, and I'm having a great time with it. But I just never got a background in it, or really any other types of media. I think you get exposed to so much in school that I just didn't. And I was around phenomenal artists, but we were all really doing very much the same thing, so it was a little limiting that way. And
I think it's one of the great pitfalls of American comics is that they separate the drawers from the colorists. That like you tend to be good at one and not the other. And I know very few colorists that also draw. Whereas for a painter, those two things are the same thing. Like the drawing is your painting. It is the coloring. And I think there's benefits that come out of that because you can really just excel and fixate on this one thing. But yeah, there's major gaps there in that dichotomy. And I don't think European comics do that quite the same way, or at least doesn't seem it to me.
Yeah, there are European comics where it's colored by somebody else, but I don't think that's the rule. I think generally it's all done by the same person. And I think you would need probably a bit more of an education to have the background to be able to do that right out of the gate. And American comics have always been monthly, and this is the reason for that is a monthly comic is very, very difficult to pencil, especially with the kind of quality they expect nowadays. And then to pencil and ink it is certainly traditionally is next to impossible. And then to also do colors it's just too much for one artist to do, and so it becomes a bit more of an assembly line. And I love that assembly line. I've got some of my favorite artists are really teams, of a penciler, inker, and colorist that makes some of my favorite work. But I think you do lose something not having the ability to realize a kind of a full vision of a piece yourself.
Yeah. I wonder if it has to do with property, the idea of actually making it a little bit like an assembly line, that if everybody is drawing Superman, you want this consistency. That I don't really associate properties or intellectual properties with European comics quite the same way, where it seems more it's this one person's take on this thing. This is their character. It's not like a million people are going to draw a Black Sat or something.
It's true. And I will say though that I think there are standout European artists where you can instantly right away pick out their artwork and it's got their own feel. I think you can say that about North American artists too. And while you can say there are a lot of artists that are clearly in the school of, this artist or that artist, and you can see the influence, they really wear it on their sleeve, the same thing still applies for European comics too. So, but yeah, not drawing, Superman or Batman or X-Men. I think I don't know. I want to say you can be more creative. I don't know. Some of my favorite artwork
is, that really has become such a system. It's a system now, and it's like American comics. I guess I'm seeing a little bit more of it now. That like idea of like it's one person doing the whole book, which is really my favorite kind of work when I see it that way. When it's just one person's vision, really.
Yeah, it's not always the best work, which is a shame because so many of us, I spent 20 years, probably, maybe not quite, but almost doing absolutely nothing but penciling, not even ever inking. And so if I would ink, it wouldn't be a good job. I hadn't done it enough. But for artists that do everything, I think you get a higher quality job.
Well, on the other hand, I feel like there's benefits to it. Like I said, this ability to fixate. I think comic artists have some of the best grasp on anatomy that I see amongst any artist, because you are so reliant on your imagination and everything is so accentuated in these drawings of superhero drawings that you kind of need to know all of your muscles or at least a pretty good approximation of them. And it's been one of my fixations lately is seeing that and trying to get good like that. So I'm hoping you'll take us through today and kind of show us a little bit of your thought process. Like I mentioned, you have a ton of great anatomy videos already that hopefully everybody's familiar with. And we're hoping to kind of continue on that and show some unusual ways to utilize that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shall we get started?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start with just a regular. You can see a bit of a shadow of it here. We were talking earlier, deciding exactly how we were going to format this, and I started drawing this, but I'm going to draw it right on top. So this is my chest shape. I'm going to draw just a standard figure here. My regular proportions. This is fairly wide across the shoulders. It's a superhero, and that my standard for me, because I'm a superhero comic artist, is really superhero proportions. And so that tends to be about 8.5 to 9 heads high. I'm going to draw this figure, and we'll measure it afterwards, because strictly speaking, I don't measure. And I can be off at times. So
we'll see how far off I am. You're not measuring heads. You're not saying like, let me make a line and break it up into 9 heads here. But I assume you're looking for landmarks that you measure against. That, like,
right. And my chest is going to come just about to here. This is the opening for my arm on this side. The other side is kind of invisible back there. So my chest is going to be here. I give it just a little bit of a notch there just to finish that shape. And then I've got a bit of it's like a real plate for the rib cage, which is very unusual to see on a normal person. But drawing superheroes, this is kind of the standard. And it was a debate I had with myself. Do I want to draw something that's more realistic or draw more of a superhero kind of a build? I think ideally you want to be able to do both, so you can pick. All right. And so I'm going to draw a bit of a shape out for this is where my arm will project from. This is a real Andrew Loomis kind of a thing. And then my arm comes down here. My hand comes down just about to the crotch, just past. And so that makes it easy. And my elbow is just about up my belly button.
And is the rest of this, I know it's probably all pretty intuitive for you. Already, this seems so deceptively simple. I have tried this many times, and your mannequins are really excellent and have a lot more fluidity than I think people would sort of take away from it just looking at it briefly. They're like, oh, this looks simple until you try it. What other, I see you marking the elbows kind of at the belly button. What other landmarks are you looking for? Are you like judging, how big the stomach is compared to the chest? Or do you have hard rules about any of that stuff?
Truthfully, my rules are, it's all like handwriting. And I'd love to say that I really have very hard and fast rules, but I don't. So much of it is just repetition. And the more you write, the more you're not really having to think about the letters you're writing. And so I would be lying if I said I'm really thinking in those terms a lot.
That makes sense.
And something to think about is I'm going to draw one foot longer than the other foot. And that's just because he's going to be in a bit of a perspective. I don't want to draw somebody just flat on the ground. So I'm imagining that my horizon is just about here. And my point's going to be pretty far off the page there. I don't need to draw the point. I'm just kind of going to put it about there. And my point for the top of the head would be about here. So maybe the shoulder should be just a little bit higher. Anyway.
And do you always construct? I think people have gotten so used to seeing artists like Marko Djurdjevic or Kim Jung-ji, who just kind of like, or Evan Mendelsohn, who just bust out these finished drawings from imagination. Is that something you do, or do you always break it down like this, your panels, prior to doing details?
I always break it down. I have no ability to just draw finished artwork with nothing. I don't personally think that it's a thing to aspire to. I think if you can do it, that's great. And personally, I think artists like that are geniuses, and there are going to be those sorts of artists there. But I think it's a mistake to aspire to be a genius. So, the best thing to do is systematize it for yourself, learn ways to break it down into simple things. And as you go along, you'll find you have a sense of what you need and what you don't need. And if you turn out to be one of those artists that is just, that much more of a genius, well, we all hate you, and good for you.
Mentioning breaking it down, there's so many good little things going on in this mannequin already. That the whole quadriceps femoris on that back leg, that one little teardrop unit you've pasted on, has so much form to me already, and it feels like it's stuck onto this bone kind of thing. Are you thinking in big chunks like that throughout this figure?
Yes. Now, I didn't really, the arms are a bit more of a simple tube right now, but I do, my favorite way to approach this stuff, and I'll just draw an arm. And I'm going to start just with a simple tube. But the more I can, and you can see with my forearm, I'm kind of getting a bit of a forearm shape just with the outline.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my hand and my shoulder. And the more accurate I can make this with just a really, really simple sketch and not much thought, the easier everything is. And then I can say, okay, I've got now, and I don't know the names of the muscles, truthfully. And this is another limitation of no education, but this is my bicep here, and my tricep connects here. There's a bit of a muscle down the center here. This is basically 3 muscles here. And I can start to really kind of construct all of the thumb extensors come up here. I can start to construct all this stuff. There's a bone here. I don't want to go into every muscle on the arm, but the point is that if I can get a general shape that works, like for a leg, if I can, here's my upper leg. I really like to almost work like a toy. You can imagine.
That's what I was getting at. It feels like an actual mannequin. Like the way those feet are fastened in, it feels very 3-dimensional already. Like it probably has, that back leg has more weight and form to it than had I rendered for an hour on something. And you nailed it very quickly. And I guess it just comes down to comprehension, really understanding it.
Well, I will say this form here, and none of this is part of your actual anatomy. All of it's decisions, and I could put like a little pin here and then the foot would move. And the reason that I do that, and I connect the front of the foot like this, is because I once had a toy that looked like that and it really worked for me. So much of it is, and it doesn't matter if you use that. The point is to just find simple shapes to describe what you're looking for. So I could really draw that same kind of thing here. And then my lower leg, I really like to draw it as a bit of a ball. Just gives it the shape that I want. And then I'm going to do that same thing again. So my foot connects into that little bit there.
I love that. I think, and maybe we just, having been raised on the same material, tend to think of things the same way. I find that so much less daunting than thinking of tendons and muscles and all of these things that get in the way when I draw a figure. And whereas what I really need is, this has to feel like it's stuck on the ground. It's turning, whatever.
Well, and I can imagine trying to draw a leg, and I'm going to say, okay, there's this tendon here, and then there's a muscle here, and I would be lucky to have a leg that has any kind of a form of a leg. I think I could do it, but it's so much more difficult. And I already feel like I'm getting lost. Whereas if I just draw, here's where it connects to the crotch, the pelvis. And there's that shape for that. And I really like that shape just for form.
Yeah.
For that tendon, the knee connects in here as a ball. I've got a ball down here. And then I can go ahead and put those muscles in, and it's all going to work for me much easier. So
amazing. That's, looking at that forearm, I could definitely see the Bridgeman influence in that forearm.
For sure. Especially if I draw it directly from the front, it's completely Bridgeman to this day. And I've looked at so many artists since Bridgeman, but it really stuck with me.